Welcome back, storytellers. My name is Max. Welcome to the Storytellers Guild. And today I am revisiting the project that I began last year, but it's been a long time, and I was going to go back and read through it on my own time and let you reread it on your own. But it makes a lot more sense for me to go ahead and I think um, walk through it with you so that you can see how I sit back down to a project that I have not finished. And obviously, the hardest part, as always, is sitting down to finish. So, congratulations, we're here. And obviously, all of the nerves and anxiety and like self doubt that go along with that are present as always. And the job is just to ignore that and to have fun and to remember how much fun it is once you get back into it. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the den. We're going to head over, sit down at our writing desk here, and I've got it pulled up. This is the start of the story. I'm just going to read through it out loud, and I want to kind of help people sort of catch up and see where my brain is at. So I'm just gonna. I truly, this is what I do on my own time. What I was gonna do before I started recording, which is just um, read it. And one of the things I'm trying to do as a result of this process is actually dim some of the screen. I want to make it more readable for you, so it's less painful on your phone or computer or whatever you're doing. So let me know if it's too bright. We'll definitely tweak some things. For now, we're going to dive right into the action because there's a lot to go over, and I don't want this video to go too long. Detective Duncan Watercolour, The Case of the Missing Locket. Right. Tone is something that's really important when I revisit a project. I want to make sure that I'm hitting the right tone. It's supposed to be fun, playful, a little bit mysterious, a little bit spooky, maybe, but not dark, not threatening, not ominous. Just like kind of silly fun. A great example I think is well, that's not a great example. I was gonna say Little Nemo's Adventures in Slumberland, but that actually gets really dark, so not quite there. But let's go through and we'll begin with the text itself. Night settled over the city like a great big fluffy purple cat. In the distance, down by the port, the great smokestacks of the factories belched their nocturnal plumes of black and orange smoke. All was quiet in high above the noble's quarter. Yep, see, immediately we've got edits that need to be made. And it's important not to get caught up in this, just like quickly delete your stuff and keep going. All was quiet. High above in the noble's quarter. A pair of dancing shoes, well worn and sure-footed, slipped across the silver filigreed shingles. Um, Hyphenate that for sure. A very important mansion. This was not supposed to happen. Punishments for were often the heaviest. Punishments, how about we say punishments in, and right now I'm just trying to get back through so we can keep going. We can do all this in revision, so I'm just like trying to fill it out. Punishments in the noble's quarter were often the heaviest and the worst in this part of the city. Were often the heaviest and the worst. That's enough. Nobody would ever think to rob the nobles, but someone had, and more importantly, someone was. I use italics. I think they're fun. Um, and I also like to use, whoops, I also like to use exclamation points because I think they're fun. I'm having fun, right? This is my project. If you want to be a little bit more formal, you don't have to. That's okay. But I enjoy it. I think it's exciting. And I think that exclamation point should also be italicized. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. And then we'll continue. That someone was currently climbing into the open window of the Duke of Everglace, who was sound asleep in his bed, snoring so loudly that many of his neighbors had to fashion cushions over their windows to keep the nighttime hullabaloo to a minimum. The Duke didn't budge when the figure stepped onto the giant fur carpet that covered every corner of his bedroom. He didn't budge when the figure tiptoed over to the enormous and expensive armoire stationed against the far wall. He didn't budge when the figure opened one of the drawers and removed a very old, very shabby piece of jewelry. He did budge, however, when a very fat and very full fly buzzed sleepily over from the leftovers of the Duke's meal sitting on the table by the window. The fly was just looking for a comfortable place to sleep. The Duke snorted and shifted in bed when the bug landed on his nose. Um, might change that. Um, the bug landed on his nose because you want that to be like just looking for sleep. And he settled on the Duke's nose. He settled on the Duke's nose. And then we'll say the Duke snorted and shifted. Snorted and shifted violently. Not violently, just like startled. Snorted and shifted. Just leave it. We're overthinking it already, right? We got to keep going. The figure jumped behind one of the big curtains hanging from the wall, trying to be quiet. Heartbeat. For a few moments, all was quiet in the room. Then the Duke snored loudly again. The danger had passed. The figure. I like shorter sentences. I'm learning that I like it. It keeps the energy up, more percussive. I get really wordy if I do too many sentences in a row. So I'll say, for a few minutes, all was silent in the room. Then the Duke snored loudly again and turned over. The figure crept back out across the furs. It was a close call, but worth the risks the Duke had to pay. With a wicked grin, the figure tiptoed back over to the window, leapt back out onto the rooftops, and disappeared into the purple night. There we go. All right, we're done. Good. The spacing on this obviously is a bit wonky. For now, we just keep going. Editing comes very, very far in the future. By mid morning, the whole Nobles Quarter was in an uproar. There hadn't been a burglary committed in the district in 25 years. The last time had been a vagabond who'd stolen the food from a backyard picnic table. He was exiled to the desert. This sort of thing just didn't happen. Noble Knights, the acting police force for the area, were so overwhelmed with the situation they called out for assistance from the mercantile police. The merchants' quarter, just down the rise and next closest to the port, experienced crime on a daily basis, and their police force was much more comfortable with handling situations like the Duke's. They had already set up a cordon around the Duke's estate and had finally managed to remove the curious neighbors' children, and even a few errant dogs lost on their walks while their masters gawped at the sight of the scandal. See, that sentence is just like it's a whole paragraph. That's too big, but I'm going to keep going for now, and we can edit that back over later. Right now, I'm just trying to make sure that there's no like major language stuff. All that was left was the arrival of the acting detectives on the case. Screams cut through the hubbub. The sound of hooves followed shortly after, followed almost immediately by the arrival of a horse-drawn carriage sporting the livery of the Merchants' Quarter Police Brigade, or the QPs as they were known. The carriage pulled up to the scene of the crime, and 3 police officers stepped out. The first was a young woman, smartly dressed and fiercely observant. She bounded out of the carriage, surveyed the onlookers, sniffed, and stood at attention. Next came a curious-looking fellow in a big hat, round pastel-colored uniform, and rosy cheeks. He smiled effortlessly, also surveyed the crowd, and stood at attention beside the young woman. The final officer was another woman, tall and proud, with keen eyes and a uniform covered in perfectly polished brass medals. She was the headmaster of inspections, summoned to do the work of her betters, and not looking forward to it at all. And not looking forward to it at all. Someone to do the work of her betters. Was not looking forward to it at all. Smell that? She growled before the Duke approached. No, marm, said the young woman. Exactly, sighed the headmaster. No smells up here at all. Excuse me for just a second. Sorry, I've had a bit of a cough for the last like month and a half, just a little one, but I didn't want to do it into the microphone. Um, the Duke emerged out of the crowd wearing a huge red fur robe with huge white fur ruffs and a pair of boxer shorts on underneath. His large belly glistened in the morning sunshine, and his eyes fair bulged out of their sockets. Now see here, officer, he cried, waving a large finger under the headmaster's nose. What do you mean bringing these filthy animals into our pristine neighborhoods? The headmaster towered over him, feathered hat cupped neatly under her arm. I would hope you are referring to the horses in our company and not my officers. Is that correct, Duke Everglace? Duke stopped short, rubbed his nose with a large finger, and sighed deeply. Of course, Headmaster Liana, my apologies to you and your officers. But not my horses, interrupted the headmaster. The Duke's eyes flitted nervously over his assembled crowd of peers. He licked his lips. I apologize that your horses did not find more welcome here, Headmaster. Our knights will see to their care immediately. He waved a hand, and a group of knights led the well-groomed creatures out on the street. Would you care to explain the situation to us, please, your lordship? Said Liana, her frosty eyes fixed on the victim. The Duke's chin wobbled. I've been robbed. What was taken? A keepsake, sighed the Duke, very dear to my heart. He looked around at the assembled nobles again. Priceless. The youngest officer was scribbling in her notebook. What object? Said Liana. Why don't the 3 of you come inside, and we'll talk about it over a nice hot mug of tea? Liana inclined her head. Cup of tea, not mug. Cup. It's still quite early. Still too early for so much excitement. Still feels far too early. So the idea is I'm just trying to make him feel more unused to this, right? This is all very disorienting for him. Far too early. And so he's scrabbling for purchase. He's trying to, do something that feels safe because he doesn't feel safe. It's often what people do when they don't feel safe. They try to feel safe, do things that make them feel safe. This much excitement. Liana inclined her head. We would be honored, Duke. The only honor here, Quinn, whispered the detective to the young officer, is in a job well done. Don't forget that, and don't let them put their sugar in the tea. Ruins the flavor. Aye, Duncan, she winked back. Eyes on the people, eh? The young police officer wrote all of it in her notebook as they followed the Duke through the grandiose gates of his estate. The lawns were huge, nearly as big as the entirety of the police headquarters in the Merchants District. Quinn's eyes roved around, taking in all the details and noting particulars. Duncan was watching the headmaster and the Duke. The gilded gates closed behind them. How did the thief enter your dwellings? Asked Liana, now that they were out of earshot of the public, of the Duke's peers. Because, he cares about presentation. That's why he was looking around at them earlier. Um, I can only been through my bedroom window, said the Duke. I leave it open at night. I need the fresh air to help me sleep. When did you notice something was amiss? The Duke's staff ran up to her to offer him refreshments. Offer some to our guests as well, Hancock, scolded the Duke. Hancock, the staff member being addressed, flushed noticeably. He was young and overeager and proud. He offered the tray of refreshments to the officers, bowing his head low to hide his reddening face. No, thank you, said Quinn, but Duncan stopped and grabbed a handful of cookies and stuffed them into his coat pocket. Then he grabbed a pastry and quaffed it. Well, all right, laughed Quinn, but just the one. She picked a pink cookie in the shape of a flower and took a bite. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She had to fight back the urge to spit it out. She put it in her uniform pocket. I'm saving it for later, she said apologetically to Hancock. By this point, the headmaster and the Duke had disappeared into the house. Worked here long, have you? Asked Duncan. I can't really say, sir, said Hancock, looking over his shoulder. Duncan produced his badge. Detective Duncan Watercolour, RDH, and this is my associate, Officer Quinn. We're here at the behest of the Nobles Knights. Anything you could say to them, you can say to us. He smiled warmly. We're here to help, my boy. Hancock cleared his throat and set his tray on a nearby birdbath. Sorry, he groaned, rubbing his arm. Thing's heavy. Been holding it for an hour. Not at all, Duncan grinned. RDH, said Hancock. I've heard of you. Royal Detective Honoree. You helped the Queen find her crown 2 years ago. Maybe that's a story we tell sometime, right? Plugging in other stories flushes out the world. And it's one of my favorite things that stories do is like make the world feel bigger than it is by talking about things that you might not ever actually talk about. Some people would call that lazy. I don't care. Um, I did indeed, said Duncan, and I can help you. Now, what happened last night? Well, I can't say for certain, said Hancock, rubbing his shoulder. All I really know is I woke up to his lordship screaming. The rest of the staff and I ran up as quickly as we could. I was not the first to arrive, but by the time I did, it felt like every candle in the manor had been lit. People were looking around as if something or someone had gone missing. This is the object that was stolen? Asked Quinn, writing furiously. I mean, naturally, said Hancock. Nothing else was stolen. Everything was in its proper place, except. Duncan nodded wisely. His lordship was obviously slow to share the details. Do you know what was taken, Hancock? The man nodded nervously, and the color left his face. Are you allowed to tell us? The man nodded. Then why are you so afraid to? Hancock cleared his throat. It was a gift from his daughter. His daughter, murmured Duncan, rubbing his fingers across his chin. His eyes suddenly lit up. I remember now. I read about it in the newspapers. Let's see, what was it, 3 years ago? Almost to the day, sighed Hancock, picking his tray back up and looking over his shoulder. She left, did she not? Said Duncan. Created quite the commotion down at the docks as she was trying to buy passage out of the city. I believe she wound up selling most of her clothes to afford passage. No one wanted trouble with the nobles, not unless it was a preposterous amount of money. Quinn nodded. So it's all he had left of her. Hancock's lip trembled noticeably. Hasn't been the same since. Most people think him a brute, and while it's true that he can be, most of it returns to his deep and everlasting sadness. Loneliness, nodded Duncan. His lordship will never let such a weakness be known outside the grounds. Duncan nodded. You can trust us, Hancock. In our line of work, keeping confidence keeps food on the table. Before you go, added Quinn, stuffing her notebook into her jacket pocket, might we bother you to introduce us to someone? I would have a word with whoever was first on the scene. Duncan smiled. She was getting pretty good at this. The young officer. The young officer. I want to make sure that we know her title so that we understand, like, because we're talking Duncan smiled. This is kind of like an attention thing. One of the things I have to decide is which perspective the story is coming from. I think it's Duncan's, just to make him more likable this time around. But it might be a lot more fun to do it from Quinn's, so we'll see. Uh, they followed They followed Hancock up to the house and stepped into a foyer more large and ornate than both of their houses put together. Whoa, said Gwen, before she could catch herself. His lordship certainly keeps a beautiful home, said Duncan, looking around. Everything was either colorfully pastel or caked in gold. Many were both. Everything was framed by gold-polished woodwork. It felt like walking into a giant pantry, overwhelming and delightful, and perhaps a bit too much. It even smelled sweet. I want that italicized. That's weird. I want it to feel weird. Duncan plucked on one of the cookies from his pocket and had a nibble. Plucked out one of the cookies. Plucked on one. See, little things like that. Similar, I can do similar. There you go. Similar experience, eh? He said, eyeing Quinn. She nodded, but she was only barely paying attention. She was making notes about the details of the room. Who was the first in the room? Duncan said. Miss Olivia, said Hancock solemnly. She's the head of staff. Can you take us to her? I can't. I have to get this tray refreshed and into his lordship's reach. Distress always causes him to need something comforting close to hand. Who can take us then? Said Duncan. I can, said a young woman, bounding up beside them. She performed a very elaborate curtsy and giggled. Mayara, at your service. Oh, but you can just call me May, detectives. And you can just call me Duncan, chuckled the investigator. This is Quinn, my junior detective. A pleasure, said Quinn, without curtsying in response. Quinn liked fancy things, but she hated acting fancy, ever. You can follow me, said May, bounding off again. They had to walk quickly to keep up. Duncan was more curious now than at any point that day. You seem awfully happy given everything that's going on around here. May nodded. Her hair, which was up in bobs, bounced along with her head. All this excitement gives me a chance to show off my skills, both in keeping the grounds in order during time of crisis and in assisting ladies and gentlemen such as yourselves who are here to help his lordship recover his precious possessions. One of the things I'm noticing that I'm doing here that I think is really helpful is making sure that each person they talk to provides some sort of motive, right? So Hancock is tired or is tired of being shamed. So maybe a bit of resentment there, or just exhausted and wants a break, or wants to get back at his boss. And then May thrives on the situation, so maybe created it to give herself the chance to show off, right? There's lots of opportunities to expand on that. We're here to help in persist possessions. Just closing parentheses. Closing it, excuse me. Oh my gosh. Quotation marks. Beg your pardon. Do you know what was stolen? Asked Duncan. Not exactly, said May, stepping up on the grand staircase. Stopping on the grand staircase. But I know it was something precious. I want to help. Let's get you lot upstairs to Miss Olivia. That sounds lovely, agreed Duncan. How long have you worked in the Duke's household? Only a month or so, answered May, taking them through a series of rooms and doorways that made Duncan feel dizzy. Each one was more glamorous and lavish than the last. The Duke certainly didn't cut corners when it came to decorating. There was lots of gold around lots of pastel pinks, purples, and blues. I came from a lord's house across the way, Lord Errington. You may recall the catastrophe that befell his household. Something about a scandal, wasn't it? Asked Quinn, scratching her head with her pen and stretching her fingers. Come on. Scratching her head with her pen and stretching her fingers. Oh, yes, very grim, agreed May, even though Quinn had not suggested anything grim had happened. Lost everything. Poor man had to pack up and move back in with his parents in the country. How did you come to work here? Asked Duncan. Miss Olivia recommended me, said May, beaming over her shoulder. Through here, please. She moved a painting, and they stepped into a small antechamber with a spiral staircase going straight up. Straight up. Into a small antechamber. The walls were all plain and off-white, a startling contrast from the vibrant rooms they had explored already. I apologize for my creaky chair, but it's comfortable. Try not to do it too much. The walls were all plain and off-white, a startling contrast from the vibrant rooms they had explored already. This is one of the Duke's secret staircases, asked Quinn. Oh, ask Duncan. This is this one. Oh no, sir. This one sounds like Quinn. Um, but obviously I'm trying to make it sound like Duncan because she says, "Sir, it doesn't really matter. I don't think." Oh no, sir, laughed May. His are all just as luxurious as his rooms and very, very private. I still don't know of any of them. This is the staff staircase. Goes right up through the center of the household. You mean we've only half the house? We've only seen half the house? Seen half the house? I'm not gonna say that phrase because it's not really kid appropriate. I want this to be a relatively kid appropriate book. So let's say maybe something queen sticks sticks. What's an in-universe curse word, right? Like something that's like shoot or heck or darn or wow. She just says whoa a lot. That's okay. How far up are we going? Asked Duncan, trying to keep things on track. Top floor, third floor, announced May as they began to climb. Excellent, said Duncan. Nice to stretch my legs after that long coach ride up the rise. Now, you were saying about Miss Olivia? Miss Olivia? Oh, she's wonderful, sir. Got me this job. She knew my older sister back in boarding school days. They go way back, but they're barely in touch anymore. I gambled a bit, thinking she'd remember me, but she fair jumped at the chance to hire me. Said they'd been looking for some new blood. How delightful for you, chuckled Duncan, and lucky for the Duke. I hope so, sir, said May, leading them through the door into another anteroom. She pointed at one of the several doors. At one of several doors. You can wait just through there. I'll fetch Miss Olivia to you. Thank you for everything, May, said Duncan. You've been very helpful indeed. With a curtsy, the young woman vanished behind another door. So the plan moving forward, I do remember this from writing this before, is that they maybe go into the wrong room temporarily. We'll see. They're going to start poking around, but that wraps us up for today in terms of the revision and getting back to where we need to be. The tone is okay, but it feels a little stilted still. So what I'm going to do is not go back and edit this anymore because you can very easily lose yourself in rounds and rounds of edits. So instead, I'm going to keep going forward. I'm going to try to change the tone intentionally as I go. That way, I can then go back and slightly shape the tone of the first part of the story to reflect what I want it to be. For example, um, now, said Duncan, opening, trying the wrong door. Let's see if we can get lost. Trying the wrong door. Let's see if we can get lost. And that's sort of fun and playful and exciting. Um, so we'll stop there for today. Thank you all very much for joining me. This is just a quick recap. We'll be continuing on tomorrow with the continuation of the story, the sort of progress episode, I suppose. Thanks again very much, and good luck in your storytelling as well. Good night.